Good afternoon. Don't you love it when they put pressure on you, when they sort of just say, hey, by the way, you're what's standing between drinks and sort of cocktails and stuff. So thanks. Thank you so much, Georgia. So quick introduction, then I'll jump into it. So delighted to be here. This is our first time at the Sales Enablement Conference, and I heard Nick talk about how he was here in 2019. So my role at Korn Ferry, some of you may not be aware, so Korn Ferry actually acquired Miller Heiman Group. So if you remember those gold, blue, and green sheets, that's the Miller Heiman Group. So we were acquired by Korn Ferry at the end of 2019. So I'm now part of a team called Korn Ferry Digital. And I thought a good place to start today would actually share with you some of the key slides I've pulled out from the last sales enablement study that we did in 2019. It was actually called the 5th annual Sales Enablement Study. So you may be thinking, Gab, do we really want to see what was 3 years ago? But there's a reason to my madness. I want to actually show everyone how far sales or even revenue enablement has actually moved in those 2 or 3 years. But then I also have some special surprises because I want to share a study that we did at the back end of 2021 where we identified the top 12 world-class sales practices. And what really grabbed my attention is 5 of the 12 I thought, wow, these link back to sales revenue enablement. So I want to share that with you. And then I've got a special guest. I thought, who better than to sort of share with us what she has seen in the market is I've actually got a guest who I'll introduce shortly to come up and actually share with us the journey she's had, share with us the challenges, and obviously then open up to some questions from the group. So that's the plan. I've got 30 minutes, well actually 27 and a half minutes. So let's get cracking. So 2019, Korn Ferry, or Miller Heiman Group Chief Sales Officer Insights, we launched the 5th annual study, and as you can see there on the left, there was a definition of what sales enablement was. I don't want to go through that, but what I want to focus on is the clarity model, because this really got me thinking when I sort of spoke to the organisers about, hey, what do you guys want me to talk about? And they said, well, can you sort of share a bit of a journey, you know, like where you've seen sales enablement? So for me, this diamond, the sales enablement clarity model, is as valid today as it was 3 years ago, but, and here's the hypothesis, I think something has changed because we still have sponsorship, we have a charter of what we need to do for our companies, right? We then have the 4 pillars of value, you know, sales effectiveness, sales efficiency, integrating with technology, and obviously functional collaboration, and then serving, as Nick rightfully put it, the sellers, the client-facing people that we are meant to serve, who then are meant to go out and deliver value to clients. So the thing I want everyone to think about today and over the next day or two is let's start to think about what's fundamentally happening in the market, not with sellers, but with buyers. So start to think about an outside-in approach. But before we get to that, let me share some of the key slides from that 2019 study. So the first thing is sales enablement does matter. Look at the growth in organizations. So this was a study over 1,100 companies, and you can see, whilst there's been a bit of a plateau in the last 2 years, more organizations are actually investing in the sales enablement and revenue enablement function. And the reason is because it actually makes a difference. And we've seen this consistently on the left-hand side through win rates, right? Having an effective, efficient sales enablement function actually drives higher win rates. You know, and some of the other speakers have talked about, right? One of the key drivers of sales enablement is to drive revenue growth, right? Accelerate consistent revenue growth. And interestingly enough, is where we have a clear charter of what we want to achieve as a sales enablement function. And when we execute on that, it also drives quota attainment. So more of the sellers, more of the account managers that we are supporting are hitting their quota, hitting their target. So revenue is going up. Now, the other thing I sort of wanted to share is, okay, well, investment in sales enablement and training, right? This is a discussion, debate that's been going on. So prior to joining Miller Heiman Group, I worked for a number of other management consultancies. I worked at Gartner, I worked at Corporate Executive Board, and I also worked at sort of Challenger. And the discussion has always been is, do I invest in my sales managers, in my sellers? Will it make a difference? You know, what happens if I don't? And you can sort of see from this slide here that, you know, companies are investing in various amounts. Now, these numbers, of course, being a US company, are in US dollars. So you can actually see that companies that continue to invest in the development of their front line, their sellers, account managers, and their sales leaders does make a difference. And again, not here to tell you to spend more, but where you do spend, you can see it actually does correlate to, again, higher win rates and deals. So that was some of the key slides I pulled out from 2019. Let me now share with you some of the recent research from a world-class practices study that we did. And when I saw this, I thought, wow, I've got to show this slide, because this, again, not that we as sales enablement professionals need to justify why our roles should continue and why we add value. I wanted to actually show and validate, how do we keep adding value? How do we keep redefining, as I called it in my title slide, client impact? So I wanted to actually share. So these were, and you can get a copy of this from the Korn Ferry website. My colleagues are here. If you go past our little exhibition stand, I'm sure I'll give you a link to download the World-Class Sales Practices Study, which was, again, a group of about 1,200 companies globally. All regions are covered and all industry segments. And what we tried to identify from a group of 65 practices that we started with, could we narrow it down to the top 12 practices that had the biggest correlation to 7 performance and revenue metrics? And we're able to actually do that. Now you can actually see the second bit there, right? What we call performance support. I could put a strong business case together to say we, as sales or revenue enablement professionals, we actually can contribute to that. But I can probably also say, even with the top 4, talent management, the question is, do we actually play a role? Should we play a role in our talent strategy? Should we play a role in our strategic alignment, how we sort of engage with marketing? I think Nick and some of the comments I heard from people in the audience were, that adage, that story, content. Who owns the content creation? Who owns that piece? I believe sales enablement should and must play a critical role, not in always creating it, but making sure we can filter it, we can align it to our go-to-market strategy. And then obviously the last 2 around client engagement, which again, to me, is a nice link back to sales revenue enablement. Now, you may be looking at these 12 practices and saying, do they really matter? Well, they actually do, because one of the things that we did is we actually wanted to identify, like, if organizations executed on these 12 practices consistently and very well, how did it actually match to their actual performance metrics? So we actually mapped it, right? As you can see, there was a world-class group. So less than 6% of the companies we surveyed from that sample group across 2020 and 2021 actually executed on all 12 practices at what we called an exceptionally high level. And you can see the results in the table. If you look at the 7 performance metrics, revenue attainment, quota attainment, win rates, loss rates, and even turnover, the world-class group outperformed consistently on average, the average of all the rest. Now, interesting thing, I shared this slide with a client yesterday, and they sort of said to me, Gab, it's really interesting. Like, I expected the world-class group to actually be higher, but when you think about revenue attainment, like, it's not really that much of a difference, right? 107, 108% to 97%. But think of it in relative terms. A 12 to 13% increase in revenue, if your turnover every year is 500 million or $1 billion, it suddenly does make a big difference, right? But the one thing I want to also highlight is there's been a lot of research and discussion recently, and this is my segue into the next bit, is around buyer indecision, status quo. We've done everything the playbook told us to do, right? The client was ready to sign. Then suddenly we get the call or the email saying that they're not going ahead. Something's changed. And I can see a few people smoking in the audience, because I'm sure we've all been there, right? Thinking, what did I do wrong? And I think the mistake, because I've done this, we've sort of focused on is, let's dial up the fear. Let's go back in with those quarterly end of year discounts. If you don't sign by the end of this quarter, that discount that I promised you, I can't give it to you next quarter. I can throw in more licenses, right? And I started to study this for the last 6 months, and there's been some great research come out recently from one of the guys, the authors of the Challenger book, a guy called Matt Dixon, and he just released a new book called The Jolt Effect. And he actually studied during COVID, which I thought was quite ingenious, 2.5 million sales conversations looking specifically at buyer indecision. I thought, wow, that's pretty compelling, right? So this is my segue into where I think. So this is, again, not Korn Ferry. This is me as Gabriel, my hypothesis on where I think B2B buying is going and where we, as sales enablement, revenue enablement professionals, can actually gain a competitive advantage. So I'm going to use it, and yes, I did quote Gartner. Like my previous speaker, he referenced another group, so I'm referencing Gartner, making sure I do the right thing. So Gartner, I think, actually tabled this really nicely. They sort of mapped out what they called the B2B buying jobs, right? 6 steps, right? You can see them there clearly, problem identification right through to validation and consensus creation. And the belief was, if we followed these 6 steps, right, sequential, getting each a tick in the box, we get to the end and the client then is ready to sign. But it actually hasn't worked out that way. Well, not for me anyway. And then you see in that little pie chart on the far left, they actually went back and started to interview a large number of buyers, and the consensus that came back was selling has always been hard. Well, it has been for me anyway. But what suddenly we were looking at and finding was buying is not getting any easier either, right? And I'm going to share a slide. And again, it's not my slide. It's a Gartner slide, but I thought this probably sums it up really well. Okay? We think we just follow the steps. But for those of you who have been involved in large B2B transactions, it actually is quite scary because this is real. I speak to chief revenue officers, I speak to HR professionals, I speak to sales enablement leaders, and they say to me, we followed the buying stage steps, but what we found was for every step we took forward, we went 3 steps back, right? Or just when we thought we were ready to go to the next buying job stage, a new person got involved. A new requirement, criteria came up. So I know this is a little bit of a play on the graphic, but in reality, this is how complex it can be. So when I make the comment and my hypothesis about B2B buying getting difficult, it is. And it's really not because we can't conquer status quo. I think our biggest challenge today moving forward is the ability to drive buyer confidence and give them the confidence to proceed not just with us, but any vendor, overcoming status quo and overcoming buyer indecision. So the question I have for everyone, and I'd love to debate this today and tomorrow, is the standard sales curriculum, right? The sales methodologies, the sales skills, and the coaching programs, is that enough today? And I know, Rain Group, Challenger, Korn Ferry, Miller Hyman, there are plenty of vendors out there. Perhaps, as Nick mentioned from Oracle, you create your own content. So I really want everyone to think about, if you've got sales skills, programs, methodologies and coachings, fantastic. That is great because we need those, right? And as an example, because they address what I call the table stakes, the core curriculum, right? Actually new opportunities, how to manage existing opportunities, how to grow strategic accounts, right? And coaching. You cannot escape this. This is required for any world-class sales academy, commercial academy, whatever you want to call it. Whether you choose external vendors, you create your own, this is what has served us so well in overcoming the playbook of status quo. How do I get the client to change from where they are to what we want them to do because it is good for them? The question I have is, I think we're at an inflection point, and this is what I've been researching for the last 6 months and what I do a lot of talking now on, is it time to shift to a curriculum or to develop capabilities and tools that address buyer enablement? And what I mean by that is to help clients overcome any confidence issues and indecision that's stopping them from doing what they know they need to do and what we know is good for them. Can we actually address status quo and buyer indecision with just our standard curriculum? I don't know, right? But what I do know is that what we're now seeing in our discussions with clients are actually now starting to develop curriculum, content, capabilities in 4 key areas. And I'm not going to go into a deep dive in each of the products and what they do. If you're interested in doing that, please go speak to the guys at the stand from Korn Ferry. But what I wanted to share with everyone is the pillars that we've identified. And the first is about customer concept model mapping. Do we actually know what the client's actually trying to achieve, right? The second is about B2B buyer alignment. There are so many different stakeholders coming into the discussion. Do we actually know who they are and actually how they all align and try and connect with each other? The third is actually about building tools and sort of material to help us overcome not status quo anymore, but buyer indecision. Why aren't they signing? What am I missing? What's holding them back? And then my little favorite, which ties back to content, which is commercial insight, commercial perspective. Please don't make the mistake that I see lots of people do, thinking that insight and content alone is going to get the job done. And when I use the word commercial insight or commercial perspective, what I'm talking about is your content. Is it actually leaning back to your capability uniquely? Because if it's not, you're doing a great job for promoting what I call free consulting. And I know because I hate novelty, and I know a lot of you do as well. So that was a bit of a whirlwind, showing you what we've seen up until 2019, some of the new research, and I'm really excited in this new wave or trend pattern around buyer enablement, buyer indecision, and how we need to step up and actually look at that outside-in approach. How are we actually helping not just our frontline sellers and managers, but actually how are we aligning with buyers to make it easy for them to actually do business with us and buy from us? So I'm just looking at the clock, and I've got 13 minutes, which is perfect, because I mentioned at the beginning that I had a special guest. I'd like to think that this person is not just a client. I've formed a great friendship with this individual. I've had the pleasure of actually working with this individual as a client, friend. We've not always agreed with each other. In fact, that's what I love about this individual. She's not scared in sharing her opinion. And I'd like to introduce Alison Pizzullo. Alison has just recently been promoted to the role of VP, Global, I keep always getting the title on, Global Sales Excellence for an iconic company I'm sure everyone has heard of, Cochlear Australia. So I actually wanted Alison to join me for a quick Q&A. So I'm going to start off with some questions, and then I'm going to open it up to the group, because I'd love each of you to ask Alison some questions. So shall we get going?
Ooh, that's a very loud mic.
Okay, Alison, first question.
Yep.
You've just been promoted. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Into your new role. I remember getting that big email, Gab, I've just been promoted.
That's right.
I was really excited for you. So
where's the champagne, Gab?
it's on its way. It's coming after today. I wanted to ask, what's been the biggest change from you? Because we started talking 2018, 2019. We went through COVID, and then obviously we entered into a multi-year agreement, which was great. Very grateful to be working with you and Cochlear. What are the biggest shifts and changes you've seen in sales revenue enablement in the last couple of years?
It's a good question. I think maybe a little bit of our journey. So when we first met, Gab, we were in the middle of, we called it a global sales transformation, because we have names for things. And it really started out, we used Salesforce as our CRM, and we had customized, and we term it, cochlearized it to the point of there was no way to get data out of it. There was no way to figure out what somebody in Europe was doing against what somebody in APAC was doing. And so we started actually a project around aligning our Salesforce system. And we recognized at the time that we were using multiple sales methodologies around the globe. And it was also creating a lot of confusion, inconsistency. Words matter. At Cochlear, we're a bunch of relatively, we like to think we're cool, but we're kind of nerdy, like clinicians and engineers. That's the history and sort of the identity of Cochlear. And so one of the reasons Katrina and I were introducing ourselves before, and I said I'm the Vice President of Global Sales Excellence. And she asked me, so you're the head of sales? And I was like, no, I'm absolutely in an enablement function. But for me, what we do is strategic. What we do drives revenue and outcomes. And at Cochlear, enablement sounds like support. It sounds like when I tried to explain to people what enablement was, they were like, oh, so you do training. Nope, not just training. Oh, so it became clear to me that having an identity that was outside of just a support function was an important thing to do. And so that's where we landed as a company. And so that transformation that started with Salesforce, we aligned on a sales methodology, Miller Heiman. We'd been using it in our US group for about 12 years. Gab likes to tease me. I was the first client facilitator for Miller Heiman, which is not why we went with Miller Heiman, just so you know, but it was the one that fit our business the best. As a med device company, the people we sell to, we do B2B, B2C, and B2B2C. And so we're selling directly to individuals with hearing loss, but we're also selling to hospitals, surgeons, audiologists, governments, et cetera. And we do that in over 30 countries, both direct and distributor model. When we rolled out strategic selling and conceptual selling with perspective, we did that in 11 different languages. So it is what I see over the last 2 years, Gab, to get back to your question, is I think our field teams really embraced a new way of working through COVID that we thought our customers would also embrace and evolve and change to. And I think I'm surprised at how everybody's gone right back to what they did before COVID without embracing real change. Yeah.
Interesting. I get to talk to a lot of sales excellence, sales enablement professionals, a lot of sales leaders, and I'm always curious because we've come through, all of us, right? Cochlear, Korn Ferry, Miller Hyman. We've come through a very turbulent, disruptive period, right? One that I don't think we've seen ever before. It's impacted B2B sales, buying and selling. In retrospect, it's easy to look back and say, hey, I would have done this differently. Is there one or two things that you look back and think you would have done it a little bit differently to get to where you are today?
I would have started earlier. One thing I would have done differently. I think we did, I think the things that worked for us were we had executive and leadership buy-in from the beginning. So the decision to align around a sales methodology came from our sales council. We have a sales council, we have a marketing council, we have councils. It's like Game of Thrones. And so the councils aligned, which is essentially the VP of sales for each region, to say, yes, we think we can move forward with one aligned sales methodology. So that's a tick in the good column. And we also knew that we had to get our sales managers equipped and leading the way, because without them, we figured it would all fall over and we'd fail. And so we identified people in the sales leadership who could be facilitators, coaches, et cetera. We trained all of them first, and then they kind of led the charge. So that's all good. What I think is always, I think trips probably all of us up, is you think you've communicated and you think you've articulated and you think you have told people what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then 6 months down the line, somebody will randomly say something to you and you'll think, oh my gosh, I'm back at square one. Like I literally have to, let me bring you on my journey, right? So it's amazing to me. It's that forgetting curve, right, Nick, that I threw out Ebbinghaus. And the reason I got that so fast is because I use that slide a lot, because you really do need to say it over and over again.
Reinforcement. I've got a couple of other questions, but I'd like to give the audience a chance to ask any questions. So, Georgia, do you want to see if anyone in the audience have any questions of Alison and the Cochlear journey? Please put your hand up. I'm sure Alison would be more than happy to accommodate with any questions from the audience.
Any Lee?
I was just wondering if you could share your experience with, obviously, you mentioned you rolled out this training to your managers first, sort of, I guess, as champions to push this out to the organisation. I was wondering what kind of resistance you got, because I imagine, it's kind of opening what was previously a black box of how they operated, and now they have to open that box up. I can imagine there would have been quite a bit of resistance there.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think two things really quick. One is, I said words matter at Cochlear. We don't actually call it training, we call it learning. And the reason we do that is because training feels like something that happens to you. You get trained, like compliance training and all of that. But learning is something that most of us want to do. We want to learn new things, we want to challenge ourselves. So we do try to flip that around. I think one of the reasons I'm in the role I am, to be totally frank, is because I've been at Cochlear almost 20 years, and I was a sales leader. Prior to being I was in marketing. I've done a variety of things, but I spent 14 years in the US in clinical and sales roles. I'm a known entity. And so sometimes the way, pick your speaker, the fact that I was the one, I had stood shoulder to shoulder with that group before, and I was the one saying, you guys, this changed my business. This changed the way I did things. When I we had done all sorts of other sales methodologies, as many companies do. You circulate through. This one resonated for our type of sale and our type of business, and it changed the way. I can't remember who said it. Maybe it was Nick. Maybe it was somebody else. Said, very often you don't get trained to be a salesperson, right? Like you're put in that role and go sell, and hopefully you have a really good coach. But I think that made the difference for us. Is we had very little pushback. I think the other thing is, if you guys, that Cochlear is a publicly traded company. I mean, we have really high targets. We've been delivering 12 or 13% growth year over year. We want to deliver probably closer to 20% growth year over year. And to do that, people recognize that we needed to change what we were doing.
Hi, I'm Tash. I'm on a bit of a mission today, so I wanted to ask you, how are you guys decarbonizing your supply chain, and how do you help in your role?
So it's actually a corporate initiative. So we have, for example, we have implemented a new travel policy. So essentially, pre-COVID especially, people just flew around the world, right? If you had a meeting and you needed to be together in a room, that happened pretty freely. So we've made a commitment to reduce our carbon emissions by 25% this year. And we're doing that mainly through travel and some other stuff within our buildings, but mainly through travel and then buybacks. And I like your mission, Tash. It's good.
Hi, Alison.
Hi.
I am with Salesforce. I'm in the enablement space there as well. I've been for a while. We're obviously a big user of Salesforce in our own company. One of the things that we've struggled with as well over the years has been a mishmash of different methodologies over the years, measuring the impact of enablement on revenue and pipe gen, etc. But also having recently rolled out our own internal customized methodology that suits our business a bit like you. We've used different bits and pieces, and we're a big partner of Korn Ferry as well in terms of skills delivery also. Where we have a big focus on measuring adoption of the methodology, and is it getting used at each different phase of the sales process? How well is it getting used? Has that led to more success at the next level? How are you guys approaching that at Cochlear?
I mean, I don't think we're setting the world on fire in terms of measurement at this point. And some of that is because we're doing a lot of measurement in Excel spreadsheets. Until we get to the point where, so our new Salesforce instance will go live in July. We'll have KFSL at the time, so it should be a lot easier to track. We have built sort of bespoke internal Excel dashboards that tracks number of blue sheets, number of green sheets, number of deal reviews, coaching, time. We've put some of those into our KPIs. Because we know, I mean, adoption is where it all falls over, right? You can train, and that was my mission when I started talking about this transformation. Was we have to stop thinking about that. This is a tick box exercise. It's not enough to say, "Yay, aren't we awesome? We trained 569 people," and then every single one of them walked out of the room and remembered a fraction of what we told them, and then we never actually reinforced it. And so we talk a lot about. We measure adoption and reinforcement and the time that our coaches and sales leaders are spending. And we also we talk about it all the way from our exec team calls, all the way right down to the sales team and customer success team. So we're trying to keep it front of mind as much as we can. Sorry, 21 seconds.
That thing is flashing red. It's probably
it's sort of distracting.
It's time for us to sort of jump off. Thank you everyone for joining the session. Hopefully everyone's walking away with at least one new idea, something new to try. And thank you, Alison,
Thanks
for
for
being our
having
guest
me.
speaker.
Appreciate it.